This episode is sponsored by Gods Unchained, a new, free-to-play digital card game that uses blockchain technology to give you full ownership of your cards. To put it simply, each card in the game can be bought, sold, and traded as a unique digital object. And since you can earn cards just by playing in free weekend events, you can make real money selling the cards you don't need to someone who does. The game itself is designed and balanced by professional trading card game players, and they have put the focus on skill and strategy rather than luck. That means your fate won't be tied to a mana system that's almost 30 years old. But you are here for stories, I know that. Gods Unchained has lore, and it's written by Kelly Diggs, who did some fantastic work on the Magic story, so that's what got me interested. Their first season, called Trial of the Gods, is underway, which makes this a perfect time to get into the game, as it's basically the ground floor. And I know we all wish we had been there to grab Alpha Black Lotuses and Underground Seas back in the day. So consider this your second chance, and if you use my link down there in the description, you'll even be supporting Magic Arcanum as you start your collection. Talk about a good luck charm. Then, help me pick a flavorful card for my next deck. Should it be Arcana Demon? Sacred Lore? Let me know down in the comments, and then get ready to start the show. Welcome to Magic Arcanum. I'm Ryan Gomez. Behind the scenes is Nicole Letson, and we're so glad you're here because it's story time. You know, gods are a fascinating creature type, and so we thought it would be fun to rank the planar deities of magic by lore. Now, we've done this a few times already with zombies, vampires, and elementals, but I will give you a quick reminder of how it all works. For each god character depicted in the game on one or more black bordered cards, I will give them up to 10 points in 4 different categories. L stands for legendary. The gods, by definition, are important to their own plane, but that doesn't mean that they always had an impact on what was happening in the story. O is for otherworldly. Is there something unique about this character that makes them stand out in the Magic multiverse? R is for reflection. Does the character's card or cards reflect their abilities and skills as described in the stories? And note, this is one category where having multiple cards can really help your score. And E is for extra, a sort of bonus category that can change depending on the creature type. For the gods, it will stand for ethos, a word of Greek origin that can be used to describe the guiding beliefs behind an ideal. In other words, ethos will reflect how willing I would be to devote myself to that god if I lived on their plane. One last thing, these lists are long enough without including the gotcha cards that are changelings, but I will give an honorable mention to the Myojin. They were basically the gods of Kamigawa, but they were printed before that creature type really existed. Perhaps when we return to Kamigawa, we're never going back there. Anyway, the gods of magic ranked by lore. Here we go. In last place, ironically, is Iroas, the god of victory. He does have a decent otherworldly score because his lower half is that of a bull and not a horse, which would make him a centaur. So he is something else entirely, although I don't know what. Devotion-wise, this is one of the most difficult gods to activate because red and white tend to go wide with tokens, and they don't help you at all. Giving them all menace and invulnerability while attacking can be powerful, but it doesn't really fit the character to me, and to understand why, you have to look at who's coming next. That would be Mogis, the twin brother of Iroas. They fight constantly, and the two of them represent the dual aspects of war. There's the noble, heroic side, and the darker, bloodier side. And yet, these cards aren't really mirrors of each other. The power and toughness is close, but not exactly the same, and their abilities don't really play off of each other in any meaningful way. They also both had very little to do with the story, and I am not about to devote myself to the god of slaughter when I have a family to think about, So that leaves the twins rolling around together at the bottom of the chart. A step ahead of them is Ronus, the snake-headed god of strength from Amonkhet. The Amonkhet gods all score well for being otherworldly. Their animal heads and their connection to Nicol Bolas gives them a very distinct look and style, especially after they become eternalized. If you're not familiar with how that happened, you can go back and learn about it in one of my earlier videos, A History of Gods, so check that out if you need to. Out of all the Amonkhet gods, Ronus scores the lowest, mostly because he had the least impact on the story, and I haven't been to a gym in years, so I would not be devoted to the god of strength. I hope that's not a surprise to you. But Nicol has been hitting the weights hard during quarantine. I don't know who owes her money, but she's coming for you. For 22nd place, we jump over to Ravnica, where we find Ilharg the Raised Boar, cherished by the Gruul clans and fans of pulled pork sandwiches across the plain. Ilharg is a unique case because he has a card, but he didn't appear in the War of the Spark novels, at all. Fortunately, he has a perfect otherworldly score, owing to him being worshipped by the wannabe city smashers of Ravnica, the Gruul clans. Not a worm or a cyclops or any of the other big creatures we've seen on the plane. No, these guys have been waiting all this time for a giant pig to come forth and help them usher in a Spice 8 Rack sanctioned anarchy session in the streets. The card itself doesn't really capture that. I would have expected it to be more about destroying lands, or at least artifacts, but I cannot imagine the Gruul were very articulate in their prayers. Up next is Keranos, the god of storms, who rewards mortals who act with a clear purpose. I, being a much more spontaneous type person, would avoid him and his lightning bolts as much as possible. In 20th place, we find Athreos, who uses his staff as a boat to transport the living into the land of the dead on Theros. He hasn't had much presence in the story. In fact, he seems to avoid the conflicts between the other gods. Poor dude just wants to do his job well and be left alone, which I can certainly relate to, although I probably wouldn't worship until I was much closer to death myself. Ifara comes next, and I like how she rewards you for growing the population of your city by granting you more knowledge in the form of drawing a card. As the god of industry and development, she's an easy one to like, and a strong contender for earning my devotion on Theros. Karametra is another good one. As you summon more creatures, you presumably have more bodies to work in her fields, so she lets you plant additional crops by getting lands into play from your deck. She doesn't appear in the story, really, but we do know she often argues with her sister Nailia over whether or not agriculture is an affront to nature. And you thought your family had problems. Now, 17th place is where I'm probably going to start getting comments telling me I'm bad at my job of ranking made-up characters, because this is where I parked the Scarab God and his buddy, the Locust God, one step up. I will admit, these guys are cool, but lore does not measure coolness. So, bear with me while I justify their placement. Both of them were made, repurposed from other gods on Amonkhet that we never got to see. And while their presence during the Hour of Devastation was impactful, bad stuff still would have happened without them being there. They do look otherworldly, and their cards reflect how hard they are to defeat, but you cannot devote yourself to a creature that only exists to destroy you and your home. Can you? Kefnit in 15th place is a god I could at least align myself with. His job was to maintain the Hekma, a protective barrier that kept the nasties out of the last city on Amonkhet. And during the War of the Spark, he attacked the Planeswalkers and guild leaders as they were performing the ritual to bring Niv Mizzet back to life. Ultimately, he had one arm blown off by a lightning blast from Ralzarek and was then killed by the reborn Niv Mizzet, so overall he had a pretty big impact on the story. Then we come to Heliod in 14th place with the tribe's only perfect legendary score. Out of all the gods, Heliod, fittingly, has the most spotlight on him, and it just works. You know, he's vain, he's petty, he's the god of the sun, and it just comes together for him. He was the driving force behind our first visit to Theros, claiming Elspeth as his champion and then equipping her with her signature weapon before sending her up against Xenagos. Then, because he didn't want anyone else to enjoy a minute of popularity, he killed her. And then, in Theros Beyond Death, Heliod is at it again, this time telling Daxos to remove all the references to the other gods, which, you know, they kind of find threatening. So yeah, he's been a central figure in multiple storylines at this point, but I don't think either of his cards really capture his antagonistic side, so that keeps him in the middle of our list. Phoenix is next, and the god of liars and cheats has a very good reflection score because a lot of people seem to believe milling is cheating. He wasn't a huge part of the story, but he did grant Ashiok invisibility from the other gods, which let them go on to get into a whole bunch of hijinks, so points for that. But I am not going to devote myself to the god of lying because it's almost Christmas time and the Nissa on the shelf is always watching. In 12th place, we find Farika, god of my favorite two-color combination, and mother to one of my favorite creature types. I would humbly devote myself to this keeper of medicinal mysteries and patiently await her turning me into a snake. Oh, Ketra lands herself just outside the top 10, and that's largely thanks to her connection to the new planeswalker, Basri Ket. I don't understand why an archer has double strike, but at least the token-making theme carries through after she becomes eternalized. She inspired Gideon on Amonkhet, her trial ignited Basri's spark, and then Liliana used her in the final attack against Nicol Bolas during the War of the Spark, so she has been connected to many planeswalkers throughout the story. Her legacy and teachings of solidarity are now being spread by the planeswalker Basri, so it will be interesting to see where his adventures take him. That brings us to the top 10 gods of magic. From here on out, the scores are going to be impressive in almost every category, but only one deity deserves decoration by the golden mustache. Who will it be? I mean, I already know because I wrote the script, but I'll pretend to be surprised along with you guys. In 10th place, embarrassing his little brothers, we find the Scorpion God. I still wouldn't devote myself to this maniac, but he did have a much bigger impact on the story, killing 3 other gods on Amonkhet, and his card reflects that beautifully by letting you stack -1/-1 counters on creatures, a great way to get around the indestructibility usually found on god cards. He's dead now, but he did rack up an impressive body count before being taken down himself by Samut and her allies during the Hour of Devastation. In 9th place, we find Bantu, the crocodile-headed god of ambition. Over the course of the story, we learned that she helped Nicol Bolas enslave the other gods of Amonkhet, believing she would be rewarded for it when the time came. Instead, he killed her himself and had her eternalized along with her fallen brothers and sisters. But Bantu would get ultimate revenge as Liliana used her to deliver the final blow in War of the Spark, crippling Nicol Bolas before exploding from consuming all of the sparks harvested by the Elder Spell. I do not think of myself as very ambitious, so I would not be devoted to Bantu, but I do like both of her cards, especially the sacrifice theme shared with her trial from Amonkhet. I've got Thassa next in 8th place, mostly because Kiora stole her bident, but also because out of all the Theros gods, she's the only one with Cheddar Bay biscuits. Thassa is the god of the sea, obviously, but she's also the god of patterns and the passage of time, and being able to scry every turn on her old card and blink a creature every turn on her new card are fun ways to represent these ideas. And every summer growing up, my family would take a week-long vacation at the beach. So I went from being terrified of the waves to being, well, still terrified of what can be in that water. But I do have a certain respect for the ocean now, and that would translate well to devotion. Xenagos comes next in 7th place. The god of revels was a satyr planeswalker who ascended to the pantheon on Theros before being struck down by Elspeth. His card does get the party started by boosting the destructive powers of one of your creatures every turn, and being an entertainer myself, I wouldn't object to visiting one of his temples once in a while. In 6th place, we come to Erebos, god of the dead, and second only to Heliod in legendary status. It was Heliod who banished Erebos into the darkness, and the two of them have been at odds ever since. Of course, as we now know, Erebos got the upper hand at the end of Theros Beyond Death, but that is a story for another time. His cards capture his patient and accepting nature. He knows everyone will come to him eventually, so he just stops your opponents from gaining life, and their fate becomes inevitable. Paying life to draw cards is a classic black ability, and as the god of wealth, his play on greed is a great flavor fit as well. Our top 5 starts with Nailia. Now, she doesn't have as much story presence as Erebos and Heliod, but I really like her cards and what she represents for Theros. The god of the hunt cares about creatures, and since they are a great way to generate devotion, she's one of the easier gods to bring to life. Her newer card can even help you find creature cards in your deck and then makes them cheaper to cast, which isn't as flashy as some of the other gods, I admit, but that's kind of Green's thing. Sometimes taking the simple and direct approach is the most effective. Nailia can be a little rough around the edges. We know she fights with her sister Karametra, and Perforos used to have a thing for her, but apparently the two never actually got together. Although Nailia does let Perforos sometimes burn down parts of her forest to make room for new growth. So she's aggressive, but also can be protective. She cares for all the creatures in nature, except for snakes, which she leaves just for Farika. All in all, a very good god and one of my favorites, but still not good enough for the golden mustache. In 4th place, we find Crufix, one of the most mysterious entities on all of Theros. Once he remarked to an oracle that he feared what would happen if the Phyrexians, the Eldrazi, or Nicol Bolas ever came to the plane, because he knew he and the other gods would be powerless against such threats. Now, 2 of those have been beaten, or at least contained for the time being, but Crufix is still right to worry, and I like how his wisdom is reflected in your ability to hold an infinite number of cards in your hand. His look is unlike any other god, and his presence in the story is rare, but profound when it occurs. All of that combines to give him an impressive total lore score. Joining him near the top of the list is Clothus in 3rd place. She's relatively new to the story, but old by the standards of Theros, having spent ages keeping the Titans sealed away in the underworld. Now, thanks to Heliod's vain desire to be the top god, creatures have started spilling out of her domain, and so to help reel them back in, she created Calyx, who was tasked with hunting down Elspeth specifically. Clothus is one of my favorite cards to play with right now, because her ability to exile cards from a graveyard kind of lets you hip check those milling rogue decks, and put pressure on their life total with a card they don't usually have an answer for. 2nd place goes to Perforos, god of the forge and sufferer of imposter syndrome like no other. He is constantly creating beautiful works of art before deciding they're not good enough and smashing them to bits before starting all over again. Boy, I gotta tell you, as a content creator, I can relate. He is impulsive, and that can come across as a short temper, but it can also be channeled into inspiring moments of creativity. His cards, especially the newer one, do a great job capturing this aspect of his character, because you never know what surprise he has in store for you, even if that surprise is just 2 extra damage to your face. He didn't have much to do in the Theros Beyond Death story, but we know that he has a history of fighting with Heliod, so I think we know what side he'd be on. And I'm told he recently made a new weapon for Thassa to replace the one that she has lost. Honestly, I did not expect Perforos to rank so highly when I started writing this one, but after giving it some thought, his cards are really fun and definitely reflect his chaotic nature. Which leaves us with just one final god and the winner of the Golden Mustache. That would be Hazaret, the jackal-headed god of zeal from Amonkhet, survivor of the Hour of Devastation, and ultimately undoer of Nicol Bolas. Hazaret is the most legendary of the Amonkhet gods with a story that spans multiple sets, even though she only got one card. She bought her people time to escape by fighting Bantu, and then she helped kill the Scorpion god, which is something even Ronus couldn't do. She now watches over the other survivors of the plane and helps them rebuild under the protection of a new barrier similar to the original Hekma, so she must have learned a few tricks from Kefnet along the way. And during the War of the Spark, she offered Karn her spear, a weapon created by Nicol Bolas, making it one of the few things in the multiverse that could actually hurt him. It wound up in the hands of the reborn Niv Mizzet, who used it against Nicol Bolas until Bantu was able to get in there and bite him. So she's not a planeswalker, but she did have a direct impact on events on Ravnica, and really way beyond that by helping to defeat the Elder Dragon. Her card is my favorite design out of the original 5 Amonkhet gods because it's supported by other cards in the set that also look for you to have one or fewer cards left in hand. And she can self-enable this condition in the most proactive way possible by turning those extra dead cards into damage on your opponents. In her prime, Hazaret decks were so good they had to ban 2 cards. And now I'm excited to see what we can do with her in Historic on Magic Arena. Hazaret, you are a fierce protector. You are wise and powerful, and above all, a survivor in times of great peril. I would devote myself to you without hesitation, and hereby grant you the Golden Mustache, making you first among gods when ranked by lore. You know, I've never done a mono red commander deck before. I think now I might try. So if you have any tips, leave them down in the comments, and then make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the great stories you'll only find here on Magic Arcanum. We'll see ya!